Ethan, what's up, man? Good to see you.
Nice to see you. How you doing?
Good. I'm a longtime fan. My kids, my two oldest boys in particular, were pretty excited I'd be talking with you today. They wanted of all the quotes that they wanted me to tell you about, it was "Get up, you stoner dogs." That's the thing they wanted me to. That's the thing they wanted me to remind you of, as if you didn't remember that.
Yes. No, I mean, I've done a few things that had similar voices, but that is, I think, from Without a Paddle,
Without a paddle,
which is a
yeah,
funny movie. Yeah.
yeah, such a good movie. My boys, my two oldest watched that probably, I don't know, it was a couple of months ago or so, but they loved it and they were pretty excited. I was going to be talking with you today, as am I, man. I've been looking forward to it as well.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know you've been doing some amazing things. It's really interesting to see how far you've come on your own personal journey. And I think one of the things that's really inspiring about you is that I think maybe it's easy for people to see others and think that, well, that guy's got good genes, or he's always been that way and he's always been fit, and so they excuse that. But then they see somebody like you who's been in the public space for decades, really overcome his own personal obstacles and challenges, and I think that realness makes it a lot more inspiring for people on their own path.
Yeah. It's amazing that you bring this up because even me today, because I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think it is. I think it really does become a matter of perspective and how we're viewing whatever situation or whatever mission we're on or whatever task we're trying to accomplish. And so it's super easy to just assume that somebody else has it easier and therefore it will be impossible for me. And even with what you acknowledge with like the the drastic change that I made, I still get a little bit of pushback of like, well, you're a Hollywood guy, so you have the money and resources to do this, and you have a personal
Mhm.
trainer. And I'm like, look, I'm in the gym by myself every day. There's nobody working out with me. You know what I mean? I don't even really go to failure on the bench press because I'm alone and I don't
Right.
want to be the guy at the gym with the bar stuck on my chest.
Kill yourself. Sure.
Yeah, the days I go to failure, I'm on the Smith machine because it's a little bit safer. Um, but and as far as like nutrition and stuff goes, there is for sure an entry into just eating in America. Um, and if you make it there, you can make it to eating less. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So like obviously it requires some money, but like the idea is no matter where you're at, it requires actually less money than whatever you're spending to get yourself into a situation where you need to address it. So I think that's a good point to make, and I do try to I don't want to create gateways for people, and certainly I don't have genetics on my side. I have no kind of innate mental discipline on my side because left to my most base devices, we all saw where I got.
Mhm.
Um, so there are certain thresholds of effort and discipline and structure that I think are required. But I like the point you're making where it's like, you know, look, I really do believe if I can do this, if I can make this change, that anybody can. I was having much more factually, statistically, much more money thrown at me when I was overweight to
Mm.
continue being overweight than I am now.
Yeah, so let me so I've been thinking about this conversation over the weekend that I knew we were going to have this, and I wanted to ask you a question, and I was thinking about, all right, man, how am I going to say this in like the most tactful way possible? So I'm just going to come out and say it in the only way I know how, which
Sure.
may not be as tactful as possible, but you're touching on something, money thrown at you to be how you were. Like, how did it hit you, and how did you deal with being cast as, the fat guy?
Yeah. You know, I was overweight my whole life. So there was nothing I was overweight my whole life, but I was very sensitive about about that word fat or being
Mm-hmm.
looked at because I was fat. So I made a lot of intentional choices with acting to not have fatness as the punchline to a joke.
Mm.
So the character might be written for a fat guy, but what's occurring isn't about him being fat. Does that make
Got it.
sense?
Yeah, for sure. I
Um,
think about that with Remember the Titans. You know, you see this guy who's, you know, just positive and happy go lucky and wants to unite people, and that was the character rather than the weight.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Makes
And
sense.
he's written as an overweight guy, but that's not the punchline of the joke. It's not, he's not doing goofy stuff because he's fat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there was another movie which I thought was also a very good movie. I'm blanking on the name of it. Maybe Varsity Blues,
Oh,
where
sure, yeah.
the overweight character in that was kind of the point
Right.
over and over. Like he's
Right. He's
huffing on
eating all the
oxygen.
time and he's
Yeah,
got the pig
exactly.
as his pet and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it was like that kind of thing that I was not super interested in doing, and made active choices to stay away from that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, you know, there weren't many, I mean, maybe a couple instances where it was just a character that wasn't written as a big guy or a fat guy or whatever, and I went after it and got it because they were like, oh, this is an interesting way to view this. I mean, there certainly were instances of that, like Mallrats. um the very first movie I did, that wasn't written for a fat guy. That was actually, that wasn't even really being considered for another actor. The producer played that character in the first movie they did, and so they weren't really looking at it. And then I came in and I was like, I really want to play this guy, not even really putting it together that it was a character that had already been established. I just read the script and was like, oh, that's interesting. I could do something with that. And then they said, yeah, great, you're it. Um, so that was my intention. But you know, having done that for 25 years at that weight, I'm not known really in acting as what I look like now. And so it
Right.
is definitely, you know, hindering to some degree. But the reality is, I just I wasn't really happy. And there was a huge period of time in my life where there was just you know, again, I think it's perspective. I think if you believe yourself to be powerless, then you're powerless. And if you believe yourself to be causative, then you're causative. And it's just the way you choose to look at the situation.
Yeah, I like that. I've thought about that in the past. And my wife and even her and I were talking about this last night, knowing we were going to have this conversation. And that's a very interesting way to look at it. And I can even appreciate that you went after roles where that wasn't the punchline. That makes a ton of sense to me. It's like, let's make it more about this other feature or characteristic or whatever than my weight. But it sounds like also I've heard you say things in the past where, you know, you use that acting as an escape from your real life. So that did that allow you to overlook things that you felt about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there was from the time from the time I was very young, I didn't like attention, because the majority of the attention I got was about the wrongness in my body. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was actively disinterested in attention, because it all kind of uh, resulted or wound up as, let's put attention on him, and then, oh, this leads us to, well, why aren't you doing something about this weight problem?
Right.
um,
Sure.
and I didn't understand that in those terms. I understood that there was something wrong with me that I didn't feel at any point that I could fix. And so I just would rather avoid attention. As I grew up, it became obvious that there were different things I could do that were distractions. So if I created, if I became when I became an actor, it was a huge distraction to me because it was this other thing that really in reality had nothing to do with me. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you look at a carpenter, and if everybody looks at a guy and goes, "Oh, he's a carpenter," do we ever get to know who he is?
No, you write
That's
it
not,
off.
yeah, it becomes like this thing, this go-to. And so, I wasn't like a superstar or anything like that, but I became well known enough that in a crowd of people, that would become the overwhelming thing I was looked at for versus just being morbidly obese.
Hmm. Did you is and when you got into acting, I know both of your parents are actors, right?
They were in the 60s and 70s in New
Okay.
York. They were theater actors, but by the time I was born, they decided it was not an appropriate business to raise children in, and kind of got out
Interesting.
of it. Yeah.
So it wasn't so what did they push on that a little bit, or was that your own desire to get into this field?
There was I did a school play, and it was kind of this mandatory thing, like everybody in the grade has to participate in a school
Participate,
play.
sure.
Yeah, and so I did this, and I got, it was one of the first times that I got um approval from adults and other classmates, like, man, you were really good in that. And then that didn't devolve into, why aren't you doing something about your weight? Meetings with teachers generally were like, let's talk about your grades. You're doing really well in math and all of this stuff. Now, what about this? Why aren't you concentrating on this? Or talking to my parents about stuff, it would tend to devolve into weight. And this thing, I did this school play, and it kind of just would stop there. You were great in that play, and we have nothing else to say to you about
Yeah.
yourself other than that. And so I was like, hey, that's really interesting. And it was in Los Angeles, and there was another kid in my school who was an actor, and I noticed right away that nobody ever talked to him about anything he was interested in as a person, or um, who he was. It was all just like this other thing. Let's all, you were on the Wonder Years. We're going to talk to you about that. This is amazing. Nobody really cared about him. It was all
Hmm.
this distraction, and that was really alluring to me.
Yeah, I could see how that would when you had teachers and parents and people that cared about you talk about your weight issues. I imagine that it came from a place of we want what's best for you, right? Like we
For
want you to get
sure.
this stuff under control. But how, as a child and even into adulthood, did you probably didn't interpret it that way, right? I mean, how did you interpret those messages?
It just made me uncomfortable.
Hmm.
The first conversation that was ever had with me about my weight, I was 5, and when I look at pictures of myself now at that age, there's nothing, it's not a kid you would need to have that conversation with at all.
Hmm.
Um,
What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, I've seen my kids put on a little chub and then grow tall. And
Sure.
then there's this kind of thing. And there's like, you know, me at 5, I was not an obese 5-year old. I had chubby
Got it.
cheeks, but I
Okay,
was
got it.
very active, and I wasn't just like, there were no video games when I was 5. It was like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Um, I wasn't sedentary. I was an active 5-year-old kid who liked to eat and had chubby cheeks, and like,
Hmm.
but no gut or anything like that. And so I, I don't know. I would never look at a kid like that and go like, we got to get this kid under control. That would
Mm,
not be my instinct.
got it.
My grandparents did. And so my first memory of kind of self-awareness was this self-awareness that there was something wrong with me. And so it just made me uncomfortable because I didn't understand it. It was just like, oh, my body is bad.
Right.
There's something off with me. And there didn't come a point where I felt like, oh, there's something in life that's so important to me that I'm going to actually confront this thing, take a real look at it, take a look at what I'm doing to contribute to it or cause it,
Mm-hmm.
versus just this feeling of shame and badness that is so overwhelming that I can't even examine it. Does that make sense?
Well, I think yeah, it makes total sense. I think even at 5, there's certainly at 5, but how could you do that? How could you evaluate what you're interpreting from people that you look up to, that you count on, that you admire and respect, who, again, are probably coming from a good place, right?
Sure.
But how do you interpret that as a 5-year-old as, oh, that means they love me? Like, there's no way
Right.
to interpret that way. Not even for a 5-year-old, let alone a 20-year-old or a 40-year-old. That's hard to interpret that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of the trickiest thing I've had to think about. And um, I have no solution. Like I have no, the only thing that I think is kind of the morally righteous thing to do is like set a good example
Mm-hmm.
and provide healthy situations for your kids. Like that's the best I can do. Um, but I don't think for a second that any of the people that had those conversations were ill-willed or evil or bad. Of course, it was all concern and people doing what they thought to be the right thing.
Right. Yeah, I've even thought that. My oldest son, you have 4 kids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 4 as well. My oldest he'll be 13 here in the next several weeks. And he did exactly what you talked about, where it's kind of that accordion effect with children. They put on a little weight and then they get tall and they lean out and then they put the weight back on, and it's that accordion effect. And he was dealing with that a little bit, and he was feeling some embarrassment for his weight. And over the past 6 months has just been on a tear of just getting in shape and being motivated. And people are like, "Oh, how do you do it?" And I'm like, man, like, I wish I could tell you I had the formula. And this is what you're saying is like, all that I've done is we have the right food in our house and we live an active lifestyle as parents. My wife takes him to CrossFit 4 days a week. I take him to jujitsu 3 days a week. Like, there's no formula. We're just trying to live healthy ourselves. And I think that just is then inherent in our kids, and they learn, and they don't have any they're kids. Like, we're not going to McDonald's, so you don't get McDonald's because this is what's for dinner. Like, this is all there
Right.
is. So
Yeah.
it's almost like you do the right things out of just, this is what's in front of you, and there's no other options.
Yeah. I really do believe that's the most correct solution or the
Mm,
the way to do it. Um, that wasn't my experience as a kid, and I've even failed at that as a parent
of course,
at times,
sure.
but I strive for that,
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the moment for you? Was there a moment, or was it just, one little thing after another, and eventually there was a straw that broke the camel's back? Or, I've had friends where, one friend in particular I'm thinking of, who was living, he wasn't I'll say it this way out of respect for him. He wasn't living the life that he knew he wanted to live, and he had a very cathartic moment in time, and it was like a light switch for him, and everything transformed literally overnight. But what was that for you? What was that experience for you?
Yeah, that for me was getting together with the girl who is now my wife, and it was really you know, the first time I thought about future in terms of the potential to have something I really, really wanted that was maybe more important to me than anything I'd had before,
Mm,
and also like to lose it. And And it became this really kind of psychologically tricky, abstract scenario that I don't even know that I have efficient language to describe what the feeling was, but it was this situation that is utterly objective. You can see it. There's no hiding the fact that I'm 500 pounds, morbidly obese. A girl who loves me, who I'm ashamed to like hold her hand in public because I don't want my shame to bleed over into her.
Mm.
Um, and yet I know that most of the way she lives her life and the way and the things she wants to do with me also, I can't really participate in, or I won't be able to long term. Um, and it was like, oh, if I want this to work, I have to make a change.
Mm.
And if I want to make a change, I have to admit to her that there's this problem, which she seems totally oblivious to because she's never brought it up to me.
Mm.
Um, how could you know? So how do I tell her about this? Ask her for help. I'm also a sober person, and there's this idea, and I know some people get kind of weird about the idea of powerlessness, but I think in a situation that you are not being responsible for, that if you look at it and you go to your teammates or your partners, you go like, "Hey, I need help. I'm not winning this battle. What can you do to what do I do? I need help because I'm going to lose."
Mm-hmm.
That's what I take in the same sense of like admitting that you're powerless. It's a big step from pretending that you're going to win and losing. It's kind of like a reckoning. And so I had to go to her and say, like, I need your help. I don't know what to do. I want to make a change. And she was like, great, let's do it.
Hmm.
And we just kind of never looked back.
It's interesting that you say admitting powerlessness when you reached out for help with her or your partner. And I've heard you use partner not as your romantic partner necessarily, but it could be your children or a colleague or a friend as a partner. I've heard you use that term in the past.
Yeah.
That when you actually admit, like you said, that you're powerless, you actually are giving yourself power to do something about it by enlisting people to help you on that path.
It's you're dead on because it's actually the most empowering thing you can
Right.
do. You're totally confronting reality and going like, I'm going to lose this fight on my own. Let me take somebody, let me just if you don't even elicit help from somebody, just stating that the minute you realize like on this treadmill, on this hamster wheel, whatever I'm doing is a losing formula.
Mm-hmm.
But often I found myself that if that thought even approached, I would brush it away and just continue doing what I'm doing into failure. And so
Right.
it's that moment of recognizing, I think, I'm losing. I got to change tactics. I got to recognize that my instinct right now is not getting me to the solution I want to get it to. And sometimes just realizing that you haven't even thought of a solution, that you're not even looking for a formula to win is the moment. And yeah, I totally agree with you. So the wording, I also don't love words that lead us into a trap of powerlessness. And so I get the idea of powerlessness as a negative,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time it makes sense to me because it's also me going, what I'm doing is failing and I need to get off this track and I need to do something else.
I'm a firm believer in the power of words. I mean, you've said the term failing a couple of times, and it's amazing. I was having a conversation with a friend earlier today, how afraid we are of painting a realistic picture of life. Like how many people will avoid using that word failure. They just won't even say it. They'll make up little things like there's winning or there's learning. And they'll try to avoid saying they fail because they're so afraid of actually saying that word. But it sounds like you're saying it and giving it a healthy context so that you could actually improve your life. But it's got to be founded in reality, which is I'm not doing I'm failing. I'm not doing what I need to be doing right now.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to learn. And I'm also not afraid to fail anymore, because I think as long as I'm making improvements, you
Mm,
know, if I can admit to myself that I don't understand something or know anything about it, and that I'm going to go headfirst into it to learn with an open mind, going, I don't know anything about this, I can't expect to be, but again, I understand how words get in there, and you could go like, no, I'm constantly winning because I'm, improving myself. I get that. But if I have an idea that I'm going to be really good at something eventually, if that's what I'm working towards, then it's okay to fail along the way and
right.
to improve based on that.
Yeah, that
That
makes
that's
sense.
that's my take. I do think today we are somewhat overly significant with language, but I also think like it's a really powerful tool.
If you're conscious about it, and I think a lot of people aren't, they just use the words that their parents used or that their friends are using, and they don't think about how that tone or the actual verbiage is affecting them positively and negatively. They aren't as intentional as they could be about the words and the power of the tool that they're using.
Yeah.
So you talked about your wife, one of the things you said is, I don't know if she was oblivious to it or it didn't bother her. I mean, I'm sure you guys have had conversations about this because she clearly she would have known that you were
I mean,
overweight and right. So like, so was
yes.
that, so did she look past that? Was that an issue? Was she genuinely not concerned? Like where was she coming from at the time?
She just really enjoyed my company,
Mm,
and and our conversations. And it was kind of, growing up as a kid, before I had acting to distract people. Um, it was everything I kind of imagined should be attractive about me. You know, Interest in a topic, ability to communicate about it, thoughts, wit, like all of these things. I was like, that's all I've got. I've got
mm-hmm.
nothing else. I don't have anything else to attract anybody. So if I'm going to make friends, this is what I've got in my toolbox. And those kind of things won her over. And so, yeah, I mean, she's now got uh, high investment in my health. We've been
Mm-hmm. Of
together
course.
20 years now, and we have 4 children, and kids are in college, and like, and she's like, listen, you better stick around for a long time. These things when we were teenagers were not thoughts that we were having, because we weren't thinking that long term into the future. I think when we got together, it was just like I was entertaining to her, and sweet and comforting and all of these things. And I think the minute I was showing that I was interested in something into the future, it was even more of like, oh, okay, yeah, I hadn't
Mm.
really, let's really investigate this. What can we do? And.
I was going to ask if it was it's almost a weird thing to think, but I believe this happens for people even when they know they aren't on the path or they see other people that they care about, like their fiance or boyfriend or husband or whatever, that are doing things that are not good for them. There's still an element of risk in changing, even if it's for the better. Did she experience any of that? And was she concerned as you decided that you wanted to go on this path to improving yourself physically and, of course, the mental growth that comes from it too?
No, I mean, she's gotten annoyed with me throughout our history with like pursuits that have wound up taking up a lot of my time.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, I got super interested in chess for a long time, and she was like, "Oh, you're playing chess again, okay?" Or, there was a 5 year period where I was just like insanely interested in cooking, and I would take her and the kids around the world to like eat at restaurants. Meanwhile, I'm dieting, can't eat there. So I'm just like watching them eat it and like asking them to describe how it tastes. And she was just finally fed up with this. She was like, this is crazy. I'm not doing this anymore. So she's definitely gotten annoyed with that. But the actual act of improving myself, I've never in my life had somebody be more supportive of me.
Hmm.
I'll now sometimes show her pictures of dudes on social media and go like, I'm gonna look like that one day, and she's like, no, you're not, dude. I'm not into that. That's not happening. So there's that kind of thing, but like if it's healthy and like, and healthy, I mean like both mentally and physically healthy, she's been nothing but supportive.
That's good. Yeah, you gotta have a partner like that. How has it impacted her? I don't know anything about your wife, but how has your personal journey impacted her? And have you been able to increase your, I guess, your level of influence, and how has your transition impacted her throughout her life?
Yeah, I mean, she did she has joked a few times that every time um my diet gets really, really strict, her and the kids gain weight because suddenly I'm cooking all the things I can't eat and feeding it to them, and like doing some psychological sublimation from like, well, I can't eat this food, but I'm going to cook it and I'm going to watch you eat it and I'm going to experience it that way. And
Interesting.
so there's been a little bit of that, but mostly, um, I think mostly it's a lot of the active stuff that when we first got together, she was super interested in, that I was not super interested in, that now I'm so interested. Like she's always liked hiking. That's just something she really enjoys doing. And I got to be honest, for years, it was just something that I would be like, well, I'm not doing that. With you. You can hike, and I'll do something else. I think the only thing she wishes I had more interest in was skiing. And I've
Okay.
tried it a couple of times, and that's the one thing I can't do. But there's like not another physical activity that she could ever suggest that I would be out on.
It's got to feel good to know that, even like for skiing, for example, you may not enjoy it, but the fact that you could go out and do it and be okay and be there for her, like there's got to be an immense sense of pride and satisfaction in doing that, knowing that at one point you just physically could not do that.
Yes, I don't think we could ever call what I did on skis doing it, but I tried. I did
fair
try.
fair enough. You got out there, you did the thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
put the uncomfortable shoes on. I fell down over and over. I did that.
The one time I went skiing in my life, my stepfather took me and my sister for the first time, and I got about halfway down the hill and I did what can only be described as like an inverted helicopter spin and pegged my head into the ground.
Yeah.
and I went to the ski shop and I traded it for a snowboard and I never looked back, man. I'm like, I'm
Okay.
never doing that again, ever.
Yeah.
So I hear you on the skiing thing. On your so you decided to make this change. You were dating your wife. Did you take it to the extreme? Did you do it gradually? I know sometimes when people want to make changes in their life, whether it's dieting or trying a new hobby or interest, they just go balls to the wall and then they burn out. Did you experience any of that?
For sure. Yeah, I did. I think for the first like 15 years, it was
Wow.
this kind of ping pong of, and I will say that having been as big as I was for as long as I was, I'm pretty good at suffering. Like I can take discomfort and pain to a really to the end. Like I can wring the towel of all of it.
Mm.
I can white knuckle stuff. I'm
Because of
not.
the pain you were experiencing associated with your weight and health?
I mean, yeah, it's bizarre to even think about it now because I don't really experience pain and discomfort now that I'm not actively producing in my own
Sure. You're
body.
you're you're manufacturing that on your own.
Right, but
Got it.
like the amount of constant just discomfort and pain that I was in when I was 500 plus pounds, knees, feet, ankles, lower back, constantly out of breath. Walking up a flight of stairs was like, carrying literally 300 pounds more than I
Right.
am now. It
Right.
was a lot. And and so, you know, you tell me like, okay, this diet is, 500 calories a day and you're going to do it for 60 days. I'm like, okay, no
Hmm.
problem. You get to 60 days, it can't be forever because I go crazy at some point. You die if you do that forever, but
Yeah,
you,
for
you give
sure.
me some kind of a deadline to hit. I'll even hit 60 days and go a couple extra just because. Um, but then I haven't resolved any of the habits that got me to where I was. I haven't looked at any of that stuff. I haven't actually handled anything. I
Mm.
kept expecting the diets to be solutions. Diets aren't solutions to anything. The 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 real thing I think that has helped me, and look, I speak from my perspective. I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm not a nutritionist. I I don't say this to negate anybody else's experience. If somebody had experience doing a diet, then great. That's good. I wouldn't deny that. I wouldn't say no, that's not true. From my perspective, the kind of step one to figuring out my life was confronting and looking at the habits and the activities that got me to where I am, and
Mm.
trying to unravel them and to lay in new habits. And it's a lot to try to take in at once. It took 15 years for me to stop looking at a diet to fix me, with the idea that once you do it, you're done and you're
Mhm.
and you're solved. Once I take off 50 pounds, then I'm done. I don't have to do anything else. Not true, because we haven't thought at all about the activities we were doing to get us there. And if the diet's done, do we just go back to them?
Right.
Nothing solved with a diet, in my opinion. So really, I learned this. And the other thing is, like, you talk about extremes. I've also done adding in extreme exercises in an effort to combat weight or weight regain or whatever it is I'm dealing with at the time. And I've done, you know, uh, CrossFit. I've done um, insane amounts of cardio. I was doing 40 hours on a bicycle for a couple
Wow.
of years at one point. I've done full marathons on erg rowing machines. Um, like, that's excessive. I get it
Right.
for once, but if I'm doing, like, minimum 10,000 meters a day on a rowing machine, that's a lot of cardio. Like,
Hmm.
that's an unnecessary amount of cardio. 1,000 kettlebell swings a day at one point, just because I wanted abs, and I read somewhere that kettlebell swings would get me abs. Didn't do it. Like, got crazy hamstrings, but not abs. Um, but all of this stuff was just laying in uh, things on top of all my bad habits.
Hmm.
And none of it was actually trying to get rid of my bad habits. It was just like, let's put a new habit on top of a bad habit and have them both. Like, can I eat whatever I want if
And
I'm,
exercise it off.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
And all of it crashed and burned. And so I've finally been, for the past few years, really working on, like, what can I do for the rest of my life? How can I
Mhm.
eat for the rest of my life? What kind of exercise routine can I do for the rest of my life that's not going to get in the way of or take time away from work or spending time with my kids or my wife, or um, it's not going to become this obsessive thing that then dies. Uh, and for me, all of it is moderation. It's like, I can go to the gym for an hour a day
Mhm.
forever. That is
Right.
something I can do forever. I live in a town where they've They've been closing the gyms down. I can go into my home gym for an hour a day and work out. If we get an earthquake and my home gym is shut down too, I can walk up
You
a
can do
hill for
something.
an hour a day. Yes, I can dedicate an hour a day to exercise every day for the rest of my life. Um, Again, it can't be an amount of exercise that ruins the rest of the day, because I've done
Mm.
that a whole lot too. If I swing a kettlebell for an hour
Yeah, you're
straight,
done. You're
I'm
wrecked.
done. The day
Right.
is over, right? I need the exercise to complement my day. How can I eat? Um, okay, if most of my food is protein, if I'm front loading meals with protein, and that is the thing I'm hyper concentrated on, I can have some carbs and some fat, and it's okay. And like, this took a lot of math to begin with,
Mhm.
because I had stampeded over any kind of sensation of any kind of announcements that my body would make about being full. I couldn't recognize them at all. So I
Right.
really had to spend some time figuring out what that was. And then it was like, okay, what else is getting in the way? Well, I watch too much TV. So I can limit that. I eat while I'm watching TV. I can get rid of that. Um, you know, I sometimes will go to make food when I'm really overly hungry, and then I'm making bad decisions. Sometimes I'll go to
Mhm.
the grocery store when I'm over hungry, and I'm checking out and I'm like, why'd I buy all this stuff? I didn't want to buy all this stuff. And so, like, trying to combat the bad habits I had installed has been a big deal. And I never really understood, there's a lot of words in the diet industry that I find to be pretty off-putting, like lifestyle change and mindfulness and
Mm.
intuitive eating. All of this stuff, it's all garbage. However, they are all also usable tools. Like,
Mhm.
for a long time, I would sit and compile a meal, and I would measure everything, and I would count the calories and count the macros and look at the meal and think about, that's a meal. That's not too much, that's not too little, that's the perfect meal. Now I'm going to sit and slowly eat it and try to listen and see, is my body telling me anything? Is it
Mm.
telling me it's full? I don't know. And it took a while to start to recognize, oh, I think that feeling is my body saying, we're good, you
Got
know,
it. Yeah.
all of that. But I spent years going deep into extremes that were just not sustainable.
Are you somebody who, so based on that, those extremes that aren't sustainable, do you feel like you're somebody who is excessive in everything that you do? I mean, I've talked with, man, at this point, 330 or so very, very successful men, including yourself. And a lot of these guys are 100%, 100 miles an hour or zero. That's it. That's all I do. Whether it's positive or negative, it's all in or all out.
Yeah, 100%. And this is why this is the tricky thing about, I think, food. Um, because like sobriety, and I say sobriety, like, I don't live in a teetotaler house. My wife has wine and drinks alcohol, and it's not a problem for her. For me, it was a problem. I don't drink or use drugs. That's a hard line,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm great so long as I stay on that line. Um, when I did, it was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never not a disaster. So I can't really do that with food. When I do that with food, you know, if you're in a state of dieting for too long, you die. You will die quicker dieting and restricting calories than you will from being overweight. Overweight takes 20 years to kill you. You can die real quick not eating enough. You
Hmm.
know, maybe not real quick, but weeks or months, you're dead.
Sure.
Um, I made it, 25 years being massively overweight, and it didn't kill me. It would have eventually, of course.
Hmm.
But yeah, this kind of all or nothing thing, this is what I'm trying to unravel in my life. I go into CrossFit and I'm like doing 2 to 3 CrossFit wads a day, and then I blow my knee out. And it's like, and then it's not just like rehab the knee and get back into it. It's like rehab the knee. Oh, I've also gained 50 pounds. And,
Yes.
you know, and then I'm like, well, getting on the erg doesn't feel the same anymore. I can't, you know, I can't get 5,000 meters in 13 minutes right now. Why even do this? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So there's there's a lot of that in my life, and I want to just, and I've you know, I've even proven to myself, because I blew out my bicep tendon and had to have that repaired, and still managed to make it to the gym. And
Hmm.
so I think for me, finding moderation is difficult, because I am inclined to go super extreme in whatever direction I'm going in, and it's just not sustainable for me. Like, dude, I love David Goggins. I love this guy. He fires me up. I can't do that, because that for me is unhealthy. But I
Well, he
under
even acknowledges it as being I sat down with him a couple of years ago and we had a good conversation and he said, "Yeah, I mean, this has completely wrecked my body." He admits as much.
right. Yeah, and that's what I think, you know, he'll wreck his body and keep going,
Yes.
and somehow manage to do that. The times that I've wrecked my body, and it's been a number of times now, I'm just like, the hole to crawl out of becomes insurmountable at some point, and then it just takes, you know, I had a really severe bike crash, and was just like so gung ho that I was like thinking I'm going to get back on the bike tomorrow. Meanwhile, I had like a herniated quad. I had
Mm,
no skin on my hands and my shoulders. Like I
dang.
was I was wrecked. And when I tried to get back on the bike, it was like my body just said, no, you cannot physically do this right now. And crawling out of that hole was, I think, harder than it would have been if I'd just been riding my bike for an hour a day.
The challenge I have though, and I don't know if you bump against this at all, is I tend to be more of that personality too. 100 miles in, 100 miles out, like there's no in between. And the challenge I personally have is if I'm not starving myself or on this quote unquote diet or not moving, 20,000 steps a day and working out twice a day, I feel like I'm not doing anything. And then I feel lazy or pathetic, or I'm not actually working towards my goal. Like I feel like just action is the prudent thing when I know that it's not always that you have to be moving or in the diet or eating this much food or this limited amount of food. There's value in moderation, but that's hard for me.
It's hard for me too, dude. It's hard for me too. You know, even the way I work out, I started, you know, my beginning of just weightlifting after CrossFit was, you just go to failure every
Right.
day, failure, whatever muscles you're doing, you go to
Just do
failure.
it
And
all.
yeah, and that doesn't get you. That's not where your body doesn't react the way you want it to. It's counterintuitive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I had to read about like, what do I want to get out of my body? And how do I get that? And there are formulas for all this stuff, like scientific formulas. You know, if you want to be in a caloric deficit and have and retain the most muscle mass, you don't go to failure every day. That's just not what you do. So I think that my combat for, because I completely relate to you, is setting very specific goals for myself, and then laying out the tracks and the paths for how
Mm.
to get there. And so I follow those 100%, but I'm not trying to get, if I know my goal is like November, I'm not trying to see that goal in March, because I
Right.
know it's November. What's my goal for this week? What's my goal for this month? What's my goal for 3 months? What's my goal? You know, I kind of do that. and I have these training and diet blocks, and it's like, right now today I'm hypocaloric, and like that's super difficult for me too, because I have a lot of mental baggage associated with like getting on the scale and seeing an increase rather than a decrease.
No
And
doubt.
like but that's like part of a 9 week plan. And so I'm going to stay the course on this 9 week plan and get there. And then I can't wait to be under, and go back into the dip. But all of it's planned out. I don't do really well with kind of arbitrary authoritative structures that are imposed on me. Like I didn't do well with my parents just saying, um, we don't care what you want. Here's what you're going to do, and creating these kind of structures for me to exist in. It didn't do well. But if I understand, if I have a goal and I understand the best path to get me there, and I can kind of be involved in saying like, yeah, this structure makes sense, and I can stick to it really well. And
Mm.
so I'm 100% foot to the floor with going after my goal, but it's done with a little bit more thought than just, you know, if I feel like I can stand at the end of the day, I've failed. That doesn't get me to tomorrow. Tomorrow's not going to be as good as it could.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're talking about it on that time scale, because what I think most people will do is we're coming up on the spring and summer now. So people will say, I got 60 days to get the 6-pack abs. And it's like, cool. That's okay. What do you do then? Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. Okay. So this isn't
Yeah.
going to be, you'll get the 6-pack abs. I have no doubt if you do that, but it just is not a sustainable thing. And you're going to have this accordion effect, and it's probably going to be less effective. It's definitely going to hurt you mentally. And it's just it's not good for you. One of the things I've done a lot is like just giving myself permission to do other things. Cause I think, okay, well, if I'm not starving myself, or I'm not eating just the right diet, or I'm not at the gym, what am I going to be doing? Well, read a book. Like, it may not be a physical exercise, but it's still improvement. So give yourself permission to read a book, or give yourself permission to, maybe you want to watch 1 hour of TV and that's it. Like, put a limit on it, but it's okay to do that, or one dessert a week or whatever, that I've given myself little permissions in here and there that still move the needle in the right way, but aren't all about me trying to get physically fit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the workable path for me. And like with, especially with television, we got rid of, cable. And so we have, I don't know what the hell we have, but we can watch movies and we can watch
Sure.
TV shows that have already played or something like that. But like with television, there was times where I just, I go and sit down and turn the TV on and I'm flipping around and 2 hours pass and I still haven't watched anything. And
Yeah,
so like
totally.
to your point, like if I'm going to watch something, I'm going to make a choice of what I'm going to watch. I'm not going to just randomly turn it on and flip around and then, because I'm going to try to live with more intention behind my actions. Yes, I
Mhm.
read. I think that's a very, very valid way to improve yourself. Um, Spend a little time doing that. Spend a little time even writing. I've found to be super helpful. Like my thoughts in just talking to you, I
Mm.
might sit down and write about this afternoon and try to see if there was anything new or revelatory about what our conversation brought me to. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I
definitely.
can often dissect that a little bit better in writing. Um, so all of these things, exercise, walk, taking my dogs out, taking my kids out, hanging with my wife, even to the point where like my food's gotten a little boring. How am I going to shake that up? Maybe I'm going to get into a whole, maybe I'm going to try Indian spices for a week and like look into recipes and how can I do this? Is it still fitting with my meal plan? Yeah, great. Okay, so I need these spices. I'm going to go out and find them. Like these are the things which have really helped me figure out this word that made my skin crawl for so long, lifestyle change. That
Mm. Why does that bother you?
you know all of these kind of, I think it probably bothered me for a long time because I didn't really understand what it meant. I really thought for a long time, a diet is a lifestyle change.
Mm,
I'm now changing the way I was living. And so this is a change. But a diet is always temporary because, and you know, obviously two definitions for diet here. One is just how you eat, and the other is a restriction on how you
sure.
eat. And
Got
so
it. Right.
if we're talking about a restriction, you cannot do that forever. That is not a lifestyle change because the result is always death. Period.
Yeah. And then when you course correct, and your body's going to tell you to, when you course correct, usually you're going to go off the deep end, but on the other side of the pool.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
you're just going to go
But
overboard with your eating because you're like, oh, I gotta, your body's telling you to fix it. And then you just go overboard the other way.
and there's so much to really unpack there too, because even if you know, like if you look at like the standard like basal metabolic rate calculator and you put in your weight and it shoots out a number and you have no like thyroid issues or autoimmune that would be factors like the
Mm-hmm.
average human body, it tends to be weight plus energy output equals amount of calories to sustain weight, right? That's like the base. If you diet down to a weight, that number is not correct. The number will be lower than that because your body is fighting against weight loss at every moment. It is
Mm.
because your body thinks it's going to die.
Right.
Withhold,
It's a defense mechanism that we've evolved over tens of thousands of years to get calories and not burn any.
that's right. And so
Right.
if you withhold calories, your body doesn't know you want to weigh 10 pounds less.
Yeah.
Your body thinks you're dying. And so your body is going to become way more efficient at
Mm.
burning calories at every moment. It's fighting against you. And so when you get to that number, if you've dieted down to that number, it's actually going to be less because your body is now gaming you. And
Mm.
so there's just a lot to think about. You do something extreme down, there's almost nothing you could do or put in your mouth that isn't going to cause weight to come back. Like, I mean, unless you still are way under where your calories should be. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of like it's a very hard game to win. And I know people have, and so I would not say it's impossible, but it's much more complicated, I think, than what are the habits that I've been doing? What changes can I make to my life forever? And that's not to say like, you know, people who decide to do like keto or something and go like, well, I'll never eat sugar again, or I'll never eat carbohydrates again. Okay, if that's what you want to do, fine. But at some point, the amount that you eat is still going to be a factor,
Mm-hmm.
period. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's just so multifaceted. And, you know, I look at guys that are healthy and I think, okay, well, this guy's living, you know, this kind of lifestyle where he eats healthy and he's got everything dialed in and locked in. And even for that individual who's doing that thing forever for the rest of their life, they can still do extreme stuff occasionally here and there too. You know, I've got like a friend who he's like, okay, I got a photo shoot. So for the next, you know, 6 or 8 weeks, I've really got to tighten things up. Although he always looks good, right? He's always healthy, but he's like, for this 6 weeks, I really got to be extra healthy. So there's nothing wrong with it as long as you have that lifestyle built in, those lifetime habits and activities in place.
Yeah, dude, I'm gonna go. I got down to 9% body fat next week.
Mm,
9% body fat is not really in the cards for me long term. It's not something I need to be at, you know what I mean?
right.
And this year I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna diet down to 8% body fat.
Hmm.
But like this is not about um this is not something where I'm going to get to 8% and be at
And
8%
stay
for the
there.
rest of my life. No, this
Right.
is literally just like, you know, I am better off having a goal, even if it's really long term, than
Mm.
having no goal.
Yeah.
So, what's my goal for this year? Okay, by November, I'm going to be 8% body fat. And by the way, I'm putting on weight now. So it's kind of like an extra big goal. You know what I mean? Putting on weight, I say, as I'm like 12% body fat, and like going like, this is a real weird thing to do, but okay.
Yeah, interesting. Sounds like you're experimenting, which I think there's a lot of value in that too. Just trying new things, trying different things, experimenting with what works, what foods work. I've learned over the past couple of years, there's certain food that I love, but I don't want to eat because it just does not go well for me. Even though I
Yeah.
love the taste, I'm like, I'm not going to do that because it's just not worth it to me, but that
Yeah, no, I'm
took
with you.
experimentation for me.
Yeah, I've been I do I listen, I think about it. I think in all of this stuff with in the idea of like, unless we're talking about absolute poisons like cyanide, which, or strychnine or something like that. Even an apple seed has a little bit of poison in it, but like salt, if the body has zero sodium, it's really bad because your
Right.
your electrolyte balance is off. You'll dehydrate and die if there's no salt in your diet at all.
Hmm.
Um, and salt in a massive dose can kill you. So there's a place where, and it's a fairly large window, and most bodies will say like, this is too salty, I don't want to eat this anymore,
Right.
or they'll taste it and they'll go, this is not salty enough, I want a bit more. Like, all of this is your body going, we need some, don't give us too much. But the same thing with sugar or gluten or any of these things. When I'm being like perfect on my diet, and I can figure out like, okay, I'm going to this kid's birthday party, I know there's going to be ice cream, I'd like to have a scoop of ice cream, how do I fit that into my day? Okay, well, I'm going to withhold some carbs here
Mm,
and withhold some fat here, and so the ice cream actually fits in. I still feel like crap after I've
of
eaten it and
course.
go like, not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things that you said earlier is that this was early on in our conversation about there was people who were incentivized for you to stay unhealthy the way that you were. Have you noticed? I know you've been on this path for a while, but have you noticed opportunities close themselves off? I'm sure that starts to level out and play in your favor over time, but were opportunities closing for you as you started to make these changes?
Yeah, certainly. And having been just in terms of volume thinner than I am now,
Mm-hmm.
uh I was uncomfortable at that point. I didn't like the way my body felt or looked. I didn't feel strong, and I've always kind of felt strong, and I
Mm-hmm.
felt weak. I didn't like any of that. But there were definitely times, with specific regard to acting, that it was like people would say like, we liked you more, or you were more interesting when
Mm.
X. And
Yeah.
I look, I don't blame anybody. I spent 20 plus years building a career as the fat guy. Now, not being the fat guy, I can't just expect everybody to go, well, you're equally as interesting, when they don't even, half of the people don't recognize me.
Mm.
So
Yeah, sure. Good point.
it, the, there have definitely been some opportunities that are missed, but I also just like, getting to be an old man. I've done a lot of movies, I've done a lot of TV shows. Like, I don't really have to, you know, I don't, I keep telling my wife, like, I'm just going to retire. And she's like, you're 44. You can't retire at 44. And then I'm like, well, not really. But like, I also just like having these conversations. I'm writing a book. Like,
Awesome.
if I never act again, which I still have a movie coming out, and that I did at the end of last year, at 9% body fat. So there's that. It's not
Sure.
completely that everything shut down to me, but it is different. It is almost like I have to like reestablish myself a little bit. Like, hey, I'm here. I don't know if you remember, I've done a bunch of movies, but this is what
Who
I look
now?
like
What have
now.
you done? Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Well, Ethan, I appreciate you, man. Like I said, I've been following you for the last little bit now, and of course, my family is big fans of what you do. But I think what you're doing now and the podcast that you have, and and how you're inspiring people is, well, it's inspirational. It's valuable, and it's a much needed part of society, because I think just generally we're going the wrong way. And so you're doing great work, man. I really appreciate you taking some time to join us and talk about it on the podcast today.
Absolutely, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, brother.